What if humanity's greatest scientific leap became its deepest plunge into oblivion? Project Chimera isn't just a story, it's a chilling premonition of unchecked ambition. Today, we expose the terrifying biological anomalies and the societal implosion that followed when genetic drift spiraled into an irreversible horror, revealing the true cost of forbidden knowledge. Welcome to a deep dive into the abyss of scientific hubris. In the early decades of the 21st century, humanity stood on the cusp of a new dawn. Project Chimera was its herald, a monumental global endeavor with an audacious promise to eradicate genetic disease and unlock the full spectrum of human potential. Imagine a world without cancer, without Alzheimer's. A world where our children are born stronger, smarter, and healthier than any generation before them. This was the utopian dream sold to the public, and the world bought it with open arms. Behind the shimmering facade of progress, a small, elite team of the world's most brilliant geneticists worked in secluded, state-of-the-art labs. They were pioneers, visionaries who saw DNA not as a sacred text, but as code waiting to be rewritten. To accelerate their work, they were granted controversial, ethical waivers, bypassing the years of rigorous testing and regulatory oversight that normally govern such research. The pressure to deliver was immense, and the potential rewards were world-changing. And for a time, they did deliver. The first announcements from Project Chimera were nothing short of miraculous. News reports celebrated the first children born completely free of hereditary cystic fibrosis, the first successful reversal of congenital heart defects in the womb. The scientists became global heroes, their faces gracing magazine covers. Public adoration soared. Humanity believed it had finally seized the reins of its own evolution, becoming the master of its biological destiny. No one could have predicted that this very act of control was planting the seeds of chaos. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as statistical anomalies. A slight, unexpected change in eye pigmentation in one of the Chimera subjects. A minor, but unusual, skeletal variation in another. These were whispers in the data, footnotes in lab reports. But the whispers grew louder. What began as minor physical deviations started to become more frequent and more bizarre. Doctors in specialized Chimera clinics began to report strange skin textures, asymmetrical limb growth, and unusual metabolic disorders that had no precedent. Then, the unraveling accelerated into a terrifying spiral. Within a few short years, the populations with modified genes experienced an exponential increase in catastrophic health failures. Birth defects, once thought to be eradicated, returned with a vengeance, manifesting in grotesque forms that medical science couldn't explain. Organs that were supposed to be enhanced began to fail prematurely. The promise of a longer, healthier life was decaying into a nightmare of accelerated degeneration. Behind the scenes, panic set in. The architects of Project Chimera, faced with an unfolding disaster of their own making, initiated a massive cover-up. Data was altered, research papers were retracted under flimsy pretexts, and a powerful public relations machine was mobilized to control the narrative. The official line was that these were isolated incidents, tragic but unrelated to the core gene editing technology. But the truth, like a virulent contagion, was beginning to spread. The monster they had tried to contain was genetic drift, but not as nature intended. By creating a bottleneck of perfected genes, they had drastically reduced the natural genetic diversity that acts as a buffer against harmful mutations. With each new generation, random, unpredictable errors in the edited DNA were not only occurring, they were being amplified. The elegant double helix of life was becoming a tangled, corrupted mess. The horrors of this terminal degeneration were beyond imagination. We're talking about individuals whose bodies were literally at war with themselves. Organs were developed with incomplete structures, leading to agonizing, systemic failures. Skeletons would grow in twisted, painful configurations. The central nervous system, once targeted for enhancement, began to break down, resulting in cognitive collapse. These weren't people anymore, in the way we understood it. They were living, suffering monuments to a failed experiment. Their very biology a testament to the grotesque consequences of hubris. The nightmare didn't stop at the human population. The altered genes, designed to be stable, began to contaminate the wider world. Modified pollen from engineered crops was carried by the wind, cross-pollinating with wild species. Engineered microbes, designed for bioremediation, escaped the labs and entered the water supply. The ecological ripple effect was catastrophic. We saw bizarre mutations in local flora and fauna, creating new, unstable organisms that disrupted entire ecosystems. The drift was no longer just a human problem. It was a planetary crisis. The so-called improvements had become a biological plague, rapidly and irreversibly erasing eons of natural evolution. As a grotesque truth became undeniable, public adoration turned to raw, visceral panic. The images of the Chimera children, once symbols of hope, were now emblems of horror, broadcast across every screen. Cities with high concentrations of modified populations were quarantined, becoming ghettos of despair and fear. Trust in science, in government, and everything collapsed. Society began to fracture along genetic lines, the naturals versus the modified. This breakdown led to predictable, brutal consequences. As governments struggled to contain the biological fallout and manage the dwindling resources for the healthy populations, resource wars erupted. Nations that had once collaborated on Project Chimera now pointed fingers, hoarding medical supplies and closing borders. The fight for clean water, untainted food, and safe territory became a daily battle. The utopian dream had dissolved into a dystopian struggle for survival. In the midst of this chaos, the world began its hunt for scapegoats. The celebrated scientists of Project Chimera were dragged from their labs and put on trial. They were accused of crimes against humanity, their ambition condemned as reckless hubris. But the blame game solved nothing. The legacy was already written in the corrupted DNA of millions and the fractured ecosystems of a wounded planet. Humanity had played God, and in doing so, had created its own version of hell. The ashes of Project Chimera left an enduring scar on the human psyche. The very field of genetic engineering, once our brightest hope, became our greatest taboo. A generation grew up with a deep-seated fear of genetic science, a fear that halted progress for decades. In the wake of the collapse, new global regulations and ethical oversight bodies were established, built on the hard-learned lesson that some doors, once opened, could never be closed. These new guardrails were designed to ensure that the unchecked ambition that fueled Project Chimera would never be allowed to run rampant again. The story of Project Chimera is a dark mirror, reflecting our own potential for greatness and for self-destruction. It serves as a permanent, chilling warning for tomorrow. It teaches us about the immense, untamable power of genetic drift and the true, catastrophic cost of ambition when it is not tempered by humility and caution. The future is not a code to be hacked, and evolution is not a problem to be solved. It is a delicate, intricate dance, and we must learn to respect its rhythm, or risk being consumed by it. Thank you for joining us on this cautionary journey. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the complex questions of our time. Stay curious, and stay safe.